You're on Zillow at night again, doing the same thing millions of Americans do when they're tired, frustrated, and just optimistic enough to make bad math feel reasonable. You open a listing for a $499,900 house. 3 bedrooms, small backyard, white kitchen, clean photos, nothing crazy. And somehow your stomach drops. Because this isn't a dream house anymore. This is just a normal house. And the number still feels absurd. Here's the line most people miss. People usually don't go broke buying a $500,000 house. They go broke buying a monthly payment that only looks survivable on paper. That's the real trap in 2026. Not the giant mansion you obviously can't afford. The ordinary house you can technically squeeze into if life behaves perfectly for the next 5 years. And life never does. That's why the real question isn't, can I get approved? It's not even, can I make the payment? The real question is, if I buy this house, what happens the first time real life shows up? Because the housing conversation in America is weirdly dishonest. People talk about price. They talk about rates. They talk about down payments. But they rarely talk about strain. They rarely talk about what a payment does to the rest of a household budget after month 3, month 7, after the summer electric bill spikes, after one partner gets fewer hours, after the car starts making that sound you pretend not to hear for 2 weeks. That's the part that decides whether a house is affordable. Not the open house. Not the pre-approval letter. Not the estimated payment box on the listing. Let's make this real. Meet Daniel and Marissa. Daniel is 35, works in operations for a regional logistics company. Marissa is 33, a dental hygienist. Together they make $171,000 a year before taxes. On paper, they look like exactly the kind of couple who should be able to buy a $500,000 home without drama. They're not reckless. They don't carry giant credit card balances. They're not trying to buy a McMansion with a spiral staircase and a wine cellar. They just want a house that feels stable. A driveway. A good school district. Enough room for a kid and an office. Something that doesn't feel temporary. And that's what makes this so dangerous. The buyers who get hurt by a $500,000 house usually aren't irresponsible. They're usually responsible enough to believe they're being careful. They save a down payment. They shop rates. They compare neighborhoods. They run rough numbers. But most people still make one huge mistake. They evaluate the purchase like a homeownership story, when it's really a fixed expense story. That difference matters. A lot. Because when you buy a house at the edge of your range, you're not just buying shelter. You're choosing a monthly structure that will sit on top of every other decision you make. Now let's run the math the way people should run it. Say Daniel and Marissa put 10% down on a $500,000 house. That's $50,000 right out of cash savings. Their loan amount is $450,000. At roughly 6% on a 30-year mortgage, the principal and interest payment lands around $2,700 a month. Then add property taxes. Depending on the area, call it about $450 a month. Add insurance, maybe $180 to $220. Add PMI because they didn't put 20% down, maybe another $150 to $250. Then add maintenance. This is where people lie to themselves. The house does not care that you just moved in. It does not say, you know what, they're already stretched. Let's take it easy for a while. Houses age on their own schedule. So even if you use a conservative maintenance estimate, you're still looking at several $100s a month averaged over time. Suddenly your mortgage isn't $2,700. Your housing cost is closer to $3,900, maybe more. That's the first reveal. The advertised payment is rarely the real payment. The listing sells the light version. Your life pays the full version. And that's before utilities change. Before you furnish the place. Before you realize that owning a home means there is now a permanent category in your budget called something stupid broke. It might be a fence panel after a storm, a garbage disposal, a leak under the sink, a garage door spring. It's never cinematic. It's just constant enough to matter. That's why so many new homeowners say the same thing 6 months in. We can afford the house. It just feels like there's never enough room. Exactly. That feeling is the whole story. Because affordability isn't about whether you can survive the payment. It's about whether the payment leaves room for the rest of your life. I call this the margin rule. A house is affordable only if, after the full monthly housing cost, your budget still has enough room for savings, repairs, emergencies, and ordinary enjoyment without forcing constant trade-offs. That's the standard. Not qualification. Not optimism. Margin. And margin is what most people underestimate because they're focused on the wrong finish line. They think the hard part is getting the keys. The hard part is not getting the keys. The hard part is month 7. Month 7 is when the novelty is gone, the moving costs are behind you, the first annual insurance adjustment hits, and the house starts blending into normal life. That's when the budget tells the truth. Month 3, you're still excited. Month 7, you're paying for soccer registration, replacing blinds you swore you'd keep, and realizing the old fridge in the garage is spiking the electric bill. Month 11, one of you gets a smaller bonus than expected. The house hasn't changed. Your margin has. This is where people get stuck, because a lot of high-cost purchases in America are sold through the language of manageable. A car is manageable. The house is manageable. The payment is manageable. But manageable is one of the most dangerous words in personal finance. Manageable usually means you can do it if nothing goes off script. That is not the same thing as strong. That is not the same thing as stable. Manageable is what people say right before a surprise expense turns into a credit card balance. And this is especially relevant in 2026 because the numbers have shifted in a way that messes with your sense of normal. A $500,000 house no longer sounds outrageous in many markets. It sounds average-ish. It sounds like what you have to pay to get something decent. That's exactly why buyers stop being shocked by the price and start adapting to it emotionally. The number gets normalized before the cash flow gets tested. So people anchor to the market instead of anchoring to their budget. They say, well, that's just what houses cost here now. Maybe, but a market price and a safe payment are not the same thing. A market can normalize strain. It does that all the time. Daniel and Marissa feel this pressure immediately. They start touring homes in the low 400s and keep running into the same wall. One needs a roof. One backs onto a loud road. One is 45 minutes from work. One looks decent in photos and smells like damp carpet in person. The houses around $500,000 feel different. Not luxurious. Just easier. Better layout. Fewer obvious problems. Shorter commute. Better schools. Better resale story. And that's how buyers talk themselves into a higher price. Not through greed. Through fatigue. After enough disappointing showings, the more expensive house stops looking expensive and starts looking reasonable. That's the second reveal. People don't always stretch because they want more. They stretch because they're tired of compromise. And that's psychologically powerful because compromise is emotional. Nobody daydreams about adequate square footage. Nobody imagines their future in the house with the weird hallway and the outdated bathrooms if it means better cash flow. They imagine the place that feels like forward motion. That's why people treat home buying like a reward for adult responsibility. But the budget doesn't care what the house symbolizes. The budget only cares what leaves the account every month. Now let's zoom in on their household. After taxes, benefits, and retirement contributions, Daniel and Marissa might bring home somewhere around $9,200 to $9,800 a month depending on their state and deductions. Let's call it $9,500 for simple math. If housing costs are about $3,900, they're left with $5,600. Still sounds okay, right? This is exactly where people make the mistake, because they stop the calculation there, as if leftover means available. It doesn't. Out of that $5,600 comes groceries, gas, utilities, internet, phones, car insurance, one modest car payment, one older car that still needs service, healthcare expenses, household supplies, subscriptions, gifts, clothes, child-related costs if those exist, and all the uneven expenses that don't show up every month but absolutely show up every year. This is why local household behavior matters more than abstract affordability ratios. If your actual spending habits include eating out twice a week, summer travel, kids' activities, replacing phones every few years, and helping family once in a while, that matters. If one spouse has unstable commission income, that matters. If your commute requires more gas than average, that matters. If you've been using tax refunds as a pressure release valve every spring, that matters. A mortgage doesn't arrive in some clean financial laboratory. It arrives inside the mess of your real household. And once the monthly structure gets too tight, little things start changing. You don't notice it all at once. It's gradual. First, extra payments to savings slow down. Then home projects go on the card, just for points. Then you start timing grocery trips around payday. Then the old emergency fund becomes the furniture fund, then the appliance fund, then it's just gone. Nobody wakes up and says, "Today I will become house poor." It happens through a series of perfectly understandable decisions made by people who thought the hard part was over. This is why I use a second filter, the bad month test. Don't ask whether the house works in your average month. Ask whether it works in a bad month. A bad month is not a disaster movie. It's ordinary friction. The HVAC dies in July. One of you misses a week of work. Car insurance renews higher. The dog needs a procedure. You buy school supplies and plane tickets in the same 3-week stretch. If the budget only works in the calm month, the house is too expensive. That's the third reveal. The danger isn't the house you obviously can't afford. It's the house that works only in the calm version of your life. And calm versions of life are not where financial decisions get judged. They get judged in the messy version. The month your transmission slips. The month property taxes rise. The month your adjustable insurance premium quietly updates. The month your kid needs braces. The month the water heater fails right after you already spent money on a leaking gutter. This is what ownership feels like in practice. Not dramatic. Accumulative. A lot of buyers confuse high income with high flexibility. Those are not the same thing. High income can support a big payment. Flexibility depends on what remains after the payment. Two households can both make $170,000 and live completely different financial lives. One has low debt, stable jobs, older paid-off cars, and $40,000 left in reserves after closing. The other has one car payment, student loans, expensive childcare ahead, and wipes out most of its cash on the down payment. Same income. Very different ability to absorb the house. That's why I don't like blanket statements like, "You need this salary to afford this house." Salary matters, obviously, but household structure matters just as much. A $500,000 house might be fine for one family and suffocating for another with the same income. Not because one is smarter or more disciplined. Because the rest of the budget isn't identical. The hidden costs are non-identical. The shock absorbers are non-identical. And this is where approval becomes a dangerous metric. Banks are measuring whether the loan fits inside a debt formula. Households are living inside time, stress, seasonality, repairs, and behavior. A lender can approve you for a payment that fits mathematically while still leaving you with a lifestyle that feels strangely brittle. That's why some homeowners say, "We make good money, so why does everything still feel tight?" Because high fixed costs can eat raises faster than people expect. Once a giant chunk of your income is already spoken for, even normal living starts feeling expensive. Think about what a $500,000 house really means. It's not one decision. It's a chain reaction. It determines how much liquidity you keep. It influences whether you can take career risks. It affects how hard a medical bill hits. It changes what vacations look like. It changes how fast you can invest. It changes how long you can tolerate a bad boss. This is not a kitchen countertop story. It's a flexibility story. And that's why the smartest buyers don't just ask, "Can we close?" They ask, "What does this payment do to the next 5 years of our life?" If the answer is, "It forces us to be perfect," that's not affordability. That's dependence on luck. Now, does that mean no one should buy a $500,000 home in 2026? Of course not. Plenty of households can. But the households who truly can afford it usually share a few traits. They don't just have income, they have slack. They don't leave the closing table drained. They aren't already juggling a bunch of other fixed payments. They can handle upkeep without pretending maintenance is some rare emergency. And most importantly, the full housing number does not crowd out the rest of the financial plan. That full number matters. Not the fantasy number. Not the stripped-down mortgage estimate. The real number. Principal, interest, taxes, insurance, PI if applicable, utilities, maintenance, and the annual nonsense every house eventually introduces into your budget. If that number still leaves room, now we're talking. If it leaves you hoping your next raise arrives on time, that's not a good sign. Daniel and Marissa eventually face this honestly. They sit down at the kitchen table and stop asking, "Can we do it?" They ask the better question, "What happens after we do it?" They run their current budget against a future one. They model a summer electric spike, a $2,500 HVAC repair, 1 month with reduced hours, 1 year with higher insurance. They add furniture, lawn equipment, random move-in purchases, and a maintenance line they had initially ignored because it was inconvenient. And the answer becomes clear. They can buy the $500,000 house. But to keep it comfortable, they would need everything else to stay unusually stable. That's not a collapse scenario. It's a compression scenario. Less investing. Less margin. More sensitivity to surprises. More financial decisions made from a defensive posture. So they don't buy based on maximum approval. They buy based on their margin rule. They choose a cheaper house with a less flattering listing and better monthly breathing room. Not because it feels exciting in the moment. Because the math says it gives them a stronger life. And that's the part social media never celebrates. Nobody posts, "We bought the boringly affordable house and preserved our flexibility." But in 5 years, that household is often the one with more cash, less stress, and more options. That's the framework I'd use if you're looking at a $500,000 house in 2026. First, calculate the real monthly housing cost, not the listing fantasy. Second, apply the bad month test. Third, apply the margin rule. After all housing costs are paid, is there still enough room for saving, repairs, setbacks, and ordinary life? If the answer is shaky, the house is too expensive. Not emotionally, functionally. Because at the end of the day, the core mistake here is simple. People think they're buying a property. What they're really buying is a monthly obligation with very long consequences. And if that obligation takes too much oxygen out of the budget, the house starts competing with everything else you say you want: investing, peace, mobility, generosity, rest, even basic confidence. A house should support a household. It should not dominate one. That's why, who can really afford a $500,000 house in 2026 has a much narrower answer than most people think. Not everyone who earns enough to qualify. Not everyone who can scrape together the down payment. The people who can really afford it are the ones whose budget still has shape after the purchase. The ones whose savings survive the closing. The ones who don't need every month to behave. The ones who understand that a strong financial life is built on room, not just income. So if you're shopping right now, don't let the market define affordable for you. Markets can normalize almost anything. Your job is to decide whether the payment strengthens your life or narrows it. That's the standard. Not whether you can technically survive it. Whether it leaves room for your life to keep working when the calm month ends.